Hey everybody, this is John for Pioneer Nexus MTG coming at you with another deck overview. This week going over Golgari Elves. As a friendly reminder, if you do like these informative deck overviews, please consider subscribing to my channel, giving us a thumbs up, leaving a constructive comment down below, maybe letting us know what deck you'd like to see us cover next. So Golgari Elves is a deck that historically has existed in almost every Eternal format, whether it be Legacy, Modern, etc. They're a deck that usually revolves around explosive mana growth and over-the-top plays to kind of win the game, with this kind of backup mopey beatdown plan that sometimes comes into effect. Now, obviously, the deck is its most powerful in Legacy, where it has things like Gaia's Cradle, Glimpse of Nature, and Natural Order to power out its things. In Modern, it's a deck that has often struggled, but is still a very powerful explosive mana deck, and if it weren't for Modern having so many efficient removal spells and 2 and 3 for 1s, would be a deck that would probably be a force to be reckoned with in that format. However, in Pioneer, things are a little bit different. The mana isn't quite as good. The removal spells aren't quite as plentiful. While there's certainly a lot of removal flying around, Elves is still a deck that can kind of function in terms of what it's trying to do, although it does struggle into heavy removal-based decks, such as red-black mid-range, etc. It can play over the top a lot of them, and does have a lot of ways to fight back in those matchups. Now, to get started with the deck, you start out with things like Land of War Elves and Elvish Mystic. Obviously, those are the best accelerators in the Pioneer format. This particular version is matching it with Jaspera Sentinel as yet another mana dork to play on turn 1 into other plays on turn 2, potentially do other things. The newest addition to the deck is Leaf Crowned Visionary, which is a Lord that also has the ability that whenever you cast an elf spell, you may pay a green if you do draw a card. Quite a nice way to recoup card advantage if your opponent's killing a bunch of your creatures, while also being a way to pump your team. Elvish Clanecaller. This is the most efficient Lord the deck had previously. It also has an ability that allows you to pay 4 and green to go search another copy of it and put it into play. So a nice way to use a mana sink in the mid-gate. And then Elvish War Master. Whenever one or more other elves enters the battlefield under your control, create a 1/1 green elf warrior token. This ability only triggers once each turn. Notably, this can happen during your opponent's turn if you have something like Collected Company. And finally, Dwynen's Elite, which if there's another elf in play whenever you play this, you get a 1/1 elf token along with it. As far as the 3-drops, Realm Walker is a nice shapeshifter that allows you to play elves off the top of your deck, which can be quite nice in kind of the grindier matchups. Circle of Dreams Druid. This is kind of the pseudo Elvish Archdruid in the format. It's nowhere near as good as that card is in Modern. However, it does tap for green for each creature you control. Notably, it doesn't have to be elves. Steel Leaf Champion, green, quite nicely when you play with Nykthos, and can be quite a beefy boy to either slow down your opponent's aggression if they're like a mono red deck, or to put pressure on your opponent in the mid game while you're setting up the rest of your elves to finish off the game. Finally, Shaman of the Pack. This is kind of your way to finish off the game if you can't punch through your opponent's things. Say Elvish War Master is nowhere in sight and your opponent has a bunch of blockers. This is kind of your way to go over the top and finish it if you have a bunch of elves in play. Collected Company, probably the best and worst card in the deck. This is a very high variance card. No matter how you build your deck, you can still brick or maybe hit 2 Elvish or 2 Land of War Elves in the mid game. Not exactly the most impressive, or other times you can hit something like Circle of Dreams Druid Elvish War Master on tap and kill your opponent. I mean, this is kind of a high roll card that allows you to play a little bit of an instant speed game against decks with a bunch of sweepers or a bunch of removal, threatening to untap and kill them, which is quite nice. And it's kind of a card that kind of holds a lot of these various tribal strategies together, whether it be Summon the Humans variants, the non-mono white versions, the Bant Collected Company decks, the Bant Spirits decks, etc. So this is a card that sees play in quite a few decks in the format and is quite powerful for what it does. As far as the land base, nothing too notable here other than you do have copies of things like Lair of the Hydra. You do have several copies of Nykthos, which is kind of your way of powering out these obnoxiously large turns, much like Mono Green Devotion. Mostly you pump this into Elvish War Master or use it to play a bunch of things, draw a bunch of cards with Leaf Crowned Visionary, which is quite nice. But overall, it can be awkward kind of in your early turns, so that's why you don't see the full 4 copies like you do in something like Mono Green Devotion. Some decks must play 19, some decks play 20. You want to make sure you're hitting your early land drops in case your early dorks die, where you can continue to play the rest of your spells. Sideboard, Leyline of the Void. This is primarily here for the Izzet based decks as well as the Greasefang decks, both of which can be difficult matchups. Both decks are a little bit faster to set up or have more removal than you do, and can be quite difficult if you don't have this a way to shut off their graveyard value engines. With the Izzet decks, it's obviously their Delve spells, with Arclight Phoenixes, with the Greasefang decks, obviously shutting off their graveyard stops things like Power Healing coming down and ending the game quite quickly. Golgari Charm is an interesting one. This is kind of an anti-sweeper tech, anti-creature thing, although it's not the best when you're playing a bunch of X1s yourself. And then destroys random enchantments, which can be problematic. So, maybe against things like the 5-color Enigmatic Fires deck. Mainly, I'm guessing this is sweeper insurance against things like Supreme Verdict and Anger of the Gods. Epic Downfall, primarily for dealing with large creatures, out of Mono Green and Rakdos primarily. Fatal Push when you need to slow down decks like Mono Red a little bit, or Spirits. And then Shaper Sanctuary, you bring this in against any type of removal heavy base deck. It's not always the best card to bring in, but, against decks like Rakdos and such can help you recoup your opponent killing a bunch of your creatures if they don't happen to have a sweeper like Meathook Massacre or Extinction Event. Taking a look at a slightly different version of the Golgari deck, notably this version is playing 20 copies of lands. It's playing Secluded Courtyard to help fix the mana a little bit, and playing almost every single mono black mana producing land. The reason for that is Gnarlroot Trapper, which is another mana dork, very similar to just Spear of a Sentinel. It's a little bit more conditional, but does allow you to cast your spells at a cost of a little bit of life. Beyond that, you're still seeing a lot of the same cards, so nothing too terribly interesting here, other than the 4 copies of Circle of Dreams Druid. Merowyn is a card that is a little bit awkward, kind of like Circle of Dreams Druid. You want to really play this on turn 2 if possible. It grows as other elves come into play, and as it grows, it pumps additional mana up. So each time you tap it, say it has power 5, it produces 5 green mana, and then 4 copies of Collected Company, once again, tying the deck all together. Sideboard, a little bit different in this one. Thoughtseize to disrupt your combo opponents as well as your control opponents, maybe stealing their Supreme Verdict the turn before they can kill all your creatures. Shaper Sanctuary, we've already kind of talked about. Terra Sunder is kind of a pseudo card, much like Golgari Charm is a little bit flexible in what it does. Can often exile a problematic artifact or enchantment, or you can kick it, potentially deal with anything that's a non-land permanent. Realm Walker, kind of questionable why there isn't more copies of this in this particular build, but once again, very good in the grinding matchups. And then Leyline, we've already kind of covered, as far as its power in terms of shutting down various graveyard-based decks. As far as the deck's position overall in the meta, it's kind of in a weird spot because this is a deck that definitely likes to go over the top of what your opponent's doing, but there aren't a ton of other decks that you can go over the top of that aren't interacting with you. Maybe decks like Lotus Field, decks like Mono Green to a certain extent, but Mono Green kind of does what this deck does, but a little bit better. You have the big creature beats, you have the over-the-top mana production, but this deck is a little bit different than Mono Green in terms of what it's executing. As you're seeing, no Nykthos in this particular version, but it is a deck that produces a ton of mana. It tries to do over-the-top things and kill your opponent both through combat and things like Shaman of the Pact. Beyond that, this is a deck that struggles into a bunch of heavy-based removal. While it does have a lot of counterplay to that, things like Realm Walker, things like Collected Company, things like Shaper Sanctuary, does struggle into decks like Rakdos and Izzet. But, this is very much a Goldfish deck that can easily kill on turn 4 if left unchecked, and is definitely a powerful thing that you should be aware of in the format. And if you kind of like Goldfishing decks, this could certainly be the deck for you. As always, if you like these deck overviews, please consider subscribing to the channel, giving us a thumbs up, leaving a constructive comment down below, maybe letting us know what deck you'd like to see us cover next.